Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to discuss a biological concept that we can apply to exercise and training progression. So the concept we're talking about is called general adaptation syndrome, and this was introduced to the world by an endocrinologist named Hans Selye. He introduced it in 3 phases: alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. So the alarm phase is essentially exposure to a given stress and the body's acute responses. For example, the fight or flight response, where the body begins to release stress hormones such as adrenaline. The second phase, resistance, is essentially the body's mitigation or dealing with the stress over a longer period of time. And the third stage, exhaustion, is basically stating that if you're in the resistance phase for long enough, the body's recovery resources will become depleted. You won't be able to recover from the stress, and this can lead to various injuries and illnesses. So to recap that, you have general adaptation syndrome in 3 phases: the alarm, exposure to a given stress and the body's acute responses; 2, resistance, where the body deals with the stress over a longer period of time; and then exhaustion, whereas if you are in the resistance phase for long enough, your recovery resources become depleted, potentially leading to injury and illness. And we can actually apply this concept in the world of exercise and training progression. So there's a man named Mark Rippetoe who wrote a book with Andy Baker called Practical Programming for Strength Training, and they sort of reworked these ideas to apply it to strength training specifically. In applying this model to the world of strength and conditioning, they discuss 3 phases, which they call stress, recovery, and adaptation. Now, before we dive into that, we need to understand one concept that you're probably already familiar with, which is homeostasis. And homeostasis is simply the body's current set point or level of adaptation. So phase 1, stress, again, this is where we're just simply applying a stress to the body. We're discussing barbell training, so for this example, it might be something like a set of squats. So you have homeostasis, your current set point, you expose the body to a given stress, and you experience a transient dip in performance, and this takes us to the next phase, which is phase 2, recovery. And so you have homeostasis, you take a dip in performance through exposure of a given stress, and you recover by effectively going home, eating, and sleeping, and you basically recover back to the level of your previous set point or homeostasis. So this takes us into phase 3, which is adaptation. And what the body tends to do here is, if you effectively recover from a given stress, it'll get you back to the level of homeostasis that you were previously at, that level of adaptation, and it'll sort of overcompensate so you can better handle that stress in the future if you are exposed to it again. To help illustrate this concept, we're going to walk through it one step at a time. So here's our current level of adaptation, our homeostasis. Let's say that we're currently adapting to squatting 3 sets of 5 at 100 pounds. So in order to disrupt this homeostasis, we need more stress, and so we go into the gym, and since we're adapted to 100 pounds, we do 105 pounds for 3 sets of 5. This is our stress exposure. So here we actually take an acute dip in performance. Following exposure to the stress, we go home, we eat, we sleep, and we recover. During this recovery process, the body basically takes us back to that previous level of homeostasis, and in order to better handle that stress in the future, we adapt. And what happens here is that adaptation occurs, and then we level off back to a higher level of homeostasis. So at our new level of homeostasis, we are adapted to squatting 3 sets of 5 at 105 pounds. So what do we do the following time? We go back into the gym, we expose ourselves to more stress, we disrupt homeostasis, so this might be 110 pounds on the barbell. We take another dip in performance acutely, we go home, we sleep, we eat, we recover, back to that previous level of homeostasis. The body adapts again, and again we reach a new higher level of homeostasis, a higher level of adaptation. And so you'll notice that over time, there's an increase in this, it's an upward trend. So what happens here is, if we do this long enough and we zoom out onto a graph where the x-axis is time and the y-axis is weight on the bar in pounds, this is what the curve looks like. It is a linear progression. So you're basically going in and adding more weight to the bar every single time in order to disrupt homeostasis, so stressing the body, going home, eating, recovering, and then adapting to further handle more stress in the future. Now, this particular example is a novice linear progression, and this occurs primarily as you're newly introduced to the sport of lifting. You can start from a very low weight, low level of adaptation. You can go into the gym every time, and you can tend to add weight to the bar each day that you go in. So your adaptation period at that stage is generally about 48 hours. So you could lift 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You could lift Monday, basically expose yourself to that stress, recover and adapt, and then Wednesday you could go in and add more weight to the bar. Same thing from Wednesday to Friday. So in the example of the 100 pounds of our starting set point or level of adaptation, you would do 105 pounds on Monday, and you'd be able to effectively recover between Monday and Wednesday. So the Wednesday you could do 110 pounds, and then Friday you could do 115 pounds. As a novice with very little or no prior exposure to training, you could typically continue a progression like this for up to a couple months maybe. In the beginning, you may actually be able to add 15 or 20 pounds between sessions, but as you become more and more trained, that number is going to decrease and you'll have to reduce it to 10-pound increments, 5-pound increments. But over time, that's still quite a bit of weight added to the bar. So you can squeeze out quite a bit of progression in this model of training. And as you become a more advanced lifter, the window of time for the stress, recovery, and adaptation period effectively gets wider. So where a novice has that stress, recovery, and adaptation occur between Monday and Wednesday, and then between Wednesday and Friday, for a more advanced lifter, it may be from 1 week to the next. So from Monday to Monday. For even more advanced, elite athletes, it may be months. Elite powerlifters may spend an entire year training to get 1 5-pound PR. So it really just depends on where you're at in training. But generally, programming gets more complex over time, but the principle of stress recovery adaptation remains the same. So as you become more and more trained, you basically need more stress to disrupt your higher level of adaptation. So you can manipulate multiple variables in order to introduce more stress into the program. These can be things like intensity, which would be weight on the bar if we're following the powerlifting example or strength training example. You could increase volume. So for example, if you're doing 3 sets of 5, you could do 3 sets of 8. You could do 5 sets of 5, just an increase in the overall volume. Or you could increase frequency. So if you're going to the gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 days a week, you could go 4 days a week. So basically you are increasing the stress over time, and there are numerous ways in which you can do this. One other concept that we need to discuss here is the appropriate amount of stress. So you basically need enough stress to disrupt homeostasis, but you also need low enough stress such that you can effectively recover from it and initiate an adaptation from. And I actually drew a little flow chart that will help illustrate this. In this process, we need to ask ourselves a few questions, and the first one is the stress high enough to disrupt homeostasis? So if we're following our squat example, if we go into the gym and our current level of adaptation is 100 pounds for 3 sets of 5 in the squat, if we go in and we do 3 sets of 5 at 75 pounds, it's unlikely that that is going to trigger an adaptation. So is the stress high enough to disrupt homeostasis? If no, then circle back around and do better next time. If yes, then we can move to the next question, which is the stress low enough to recover from? So basically, we need the stress to be high enough to disrupt homeostasis, but we also need it to be low enough and reasonable enough such that we have enough recovery resources to effectively recover from it. So here is the stress low enough to recover from. Again, if no, circle back around and try again. If yes, then you can move on to the next question, which is, did we actually recover appropriately from it? So did we go home and get enough sleep? Did we eat enough? Or did we pull back-to-back all-nighters and binge drink all weekend? So if we did not appropriately recover, you guessed it, circle back around and do better next time. If we did appropriately recover, this is where you would reach an adaptation. So in following this model, if your training is plateauing, you can have a fairly reasonable suspicion that the level of stress is inappropriate, such that it's too low, that it doesn't disrupt homeostasis, or that it's too high, that you cannot reasonably recover from it. Or your recovery resources are inadequate, or a combination of those two things. So the example that we discuss here is obviously barbell training, but this does transfer to other areas of exercise and training. For example, endurance athletes. If you're a runner and you're running 3 days a week, but you've been running the same 3-mile course those 3 days a week for months now, and you're adapted to that level of training and you're not getting any better, shock, you need to introduce more stress. So you can do this by adding volume. So instead of a 3-mile run, you could increase it to a 3.5 or 4-mile run. You could increase intensity. So during your 3-mile run, you could be running at your normal pace and introduce sprinting intervals. That would increase the intensity. Or you could increase frequency. So instead of doing 3-mile runs 3 days a week, you could do that 4 or 5 days a week. So basically, you just need to walk it up over time, making sure that the level of stress is appropriate, but maintaining it within parameters that would allow you to recover from it. That's it for today. I do want to circle back around and give a shout out to Starting Strength for basically taking this information in and reorganizing it in a way that's very easily understandable in the context of strength and conditioning. I will go ahead and link that book below for those of you that are interested in reading it. I think there's a lot of great information in it. I also want to give a shout out to Barbell Medicine. So the guys that started this company came up through the Starting Strength organization, and then they basically split off to do their own thing, and they've taken these ideas and they've continued to build upon them over time, refining them and communicating them in such an eloquent, articulate way, and I would highly recommend checking them out. They have a fantastic programming podcast with 2 parts that I'll go ahead and link below. They dive into these concepts on a much higher level of understanding, and they're fantastic at communicating it, so I would definitely recommend going to check that out. Thanks again for tuning in. If you got something out of this, give it a like. Go ahead and comment below with something that you learned. If you have other concepts related to training and exercise progression, would love to hear about that as well. Go ahead and share the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.